Hi everybody, Mark here. Today's topic is economics and how that plays an impact on our businesses. That said, let's get into it. We'll look at the basic concepts around economics, what capitalism is, and how markets work. We'll look at the benefits and downsides of socialism and communism. We'll look at how Canada displays characteristics known as a mixed economy. And we'll look at some of the key economic indicators. So, basically, economic concepts are the basis for most of our major business decisions. Okay. Economies play a role, and it's not just our economy, but the world economy plays a role in what goes on in Canadian business. Why? Because we trade. We buy products from other countries, and we sell our products to other countries. So that has an impact. Certainly, Canada is the US's largest trading partner, and their economy has a huge impact on Canadian business. So, definition of economics: it's the study of how society chooses to employ their resources, which are factors of production, to produce goods and services and distribute them for consumption amongst various groups and individuals. So basically, it's how we use what we've got to make things and distribute them to people who have wants and needs. Macroeconomics is the part of economics that looks at the nation's economy as a whole. What's going on in Canada? It's big picture. Okay? Microeconomics is looking at the behavior of people and organizations within a market. Okay? Micro, it tends to be much smaller focus and looking at what's going on in a specific group of people or area or organization. And another definition here, resource development. It's the study of how to use our resources and the creation of conditions that make better use of them, i.e. recycling. So if we buy something, use it once, throw it away, there is potentially still some value left in that good. If we buy something, use it, send it for recycling, we can get some more value out of that good. Okay? So, Adam Smith, very famous economist, and one of his basic premises was that he believed that freedom and choice were vital to wealth creation. Okay? What did he mean by that? Well, his premise was that if people were able to keep the profits from their own work, then the incentive to work harder was very powerful. Let's think about it. If we do something and we get the benefit, we're more likely to buy into it. We're more likely to continue to work at it. We're more likely to work harder at it. Okay? And we see this everywhere, particularly with entrepreneurship. Okay? Let's look at somebody who works for a large company versus somebody who's starting a company. Okay? If I work for Microsoft or Cisco or Caterpillar or General Electric, I have a job. Hopefully it's a stable job. Hopefully it pays well. I work 35 to 40 hours a week. I get benefits, I get a salary, I get paid vacation. I get to go home. I forget about work. If I'm an entrepreneur, I am starting something. Chances are I'm working way more than 35 to 40 hours per week. Chances are I am, at the start of being an entrepreneur, making much less money than I would if I were working for General Electric. I'm also probably working longer hours. I work later into the evening. I work weekends. Why? Because I want to build my company. It's my company. I want to build it so I can increase my wealth. Adam Smith's premise: if I can keep the profits, I'm more likely to work harder. He is often referred to as the father of modern economics, and this is a very well-known theory. In your economics classes, I'm sure you'll delve into it more. So, what else? if people are working for their own self-interest, if people are growing their companies, if people are building things for their own self-interest, one of his premises was that this actually benefits the economy as a whole. What do we mean by that? Well, he referred to it as the invisible hand. It takes that self-directed gain and turns it into social and economic benefit for all. How does it do it? Well, if I'm making more money, chances are I'm probably spending more money too. I might have a bigger house. I might buy nicer things. I might buy more things. I might eat in restaurants more. I might buy vacation property, more cars, more toys, more boats, more electronics. So what's happening there? I'm working for my own self-benefit, but that has an impact on the economy around me because I'm spending more, I'm buying more. It also has an impact on society. There's social gain as well. Well, guess what? If there are more people like me and we're all going out and eating more restaurants, then that provides employment for other people who might not otherwise have it. What also have we seen around social sides? Well, we've seen people, when they become wealthy, also give more money back to the community. People who make more tend to donate more. But they don't just donate money. Very often they'll donate their time as well. If you are secure financially, that affords you the luxury of using your knowledge for free to help others who don't have it. We see this everywhere in Kamloops. We have organizations like Rotary, very civic-minded organization that does a lot of benefit to the community, raises money for the community, and puts that money back into the community in different kinds of social programs, programs for children, programs for elderly, programs for homeless. And that all stems, according to Smith, from this invisible hand. That people who work for themselves and achieve success benefit not only themselves, but the local economy or even a broader economy, as well as social aspects. So that was the basic premise, that people who are wealthier contribute more to the less fortunate by providing jobs and goods or services for sale, as well as donating money and time in order to help others. Capitalism is a system in which all or most of the factors of production and distribution are privately owned and operated for profit. A system where all or most of the factors of production and distribution are privately owned and operated for profit. Okay? A lot of people view capitalism as a good thing. It gives opportunity. And we've seen other systems over the years develop some capitalistic tendencies. China is a great example. A free market is one where the market forces decide what is made and produced in what quantities. What do I mean by that? Well, if there is a driving need for something, then somebody will figure out how to make it and produce it and sell it. And the prices will fluctuate based on things like demand, how much of it somebody wants. It'll also fluctuate based on supply, how much people are willing to make it. So we've got demand side and supply side. Okay? And those will intersect. So, in a free market, our prices are determined by negotiations between buyers and sellers. Okay? We negotiate, and at different times, people can have, or the power can shift. You'll very often hear these terms in reference to real estate. It's a buyer's market. It's a seller's market. Currently in Kamloops, in housing, it's a seller's market. the demand is high. Lots of people want to buy houses in Kamloops right now, which means that people who want to sell are in a powerful position. They can charge more. If it's a seller's market, you will often see houses sell for more than the price that was being asked. The other side of that coin is a buyer's market. If it's a buyer's market in real estate, generally that means there are lots of houses for sale and not very many people who want to buy them. What you'll see in that case is a lot of houses selling for well below their asking price, and or you'll see a lot of houses that are on the market for a very long time. Contrast that to the seller's market. Houses aren't on the market for a very long time and will sell at higher prices. So the supply is the quantity of products or goods that manufacturers are willing to sell at different prices at a specific time. Okay, let's think about that for a second. If I make, if I make pens, okay, this is a whiteboard pen. And if the price of this whiteboard pen is $2, there's only a certain number of people willing to sell it for $2. Okay. And there's only a certain number of people who can sell it for $2 and make a profit. What happens if the price of this pen is $12? Well, at $12, a lot of people can make a profit. And at $12, a lot of people would want to sell this pen. Okay. What happens if the price of this pen is $1? Well, not very many people want to sell it because not many people can make it at a low enough cost in order to be able to make money at $1. That's supply side. Demand side is the quantity of products that people are willing to buy at different prices at a specific time. Same definition, except instead of sell, it's buy. So let's look at the pen again. When the pen is selling for $12, how many people want to buy it? Not very many. That's a lot for a pen. But when it's selling at $1, hey, a lot of people want to buy this. So at some point, the number of people who want to buy at a specific price and the number of people who want to sell at a specific price match up. And that's called the equilibrium point. That's where the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied are equal. Okay? And that is generally referred to as the market price, the price determined by the supply and demand. So here is a supply curve. Let's look at the number of t-shirts available. Okay? When the price is $5, not very many people can make money, so there's only 5 t-shirts. Not a lot of people want to sell. When the price is $50, there's a whole lot of people who think they can make money selling $50 t-shirts. Anybody who's ever been to a concert knows what a t-shirt sells for at a concert, and yeah, it's $50. Okay? So a lot of people want to sell $50 t-shirts. Not a lot of people want to necessarily buy $50 t-shirts, and we'll get to that in a second when we talk about demand. So here's a demand curve. Guess what? Like I said, down here when t-shirts are, up here rather, when t-shirts are selling for $50, there isn't a whole lot of people who want to buy them. But when t-shirts are selling for $5 or $2 or $1, there's a whole lot of people who are willing to buy a t-shirt. So, what happens when they cross? Well, when they cross, we get the equilibrium point. So somewhere around $15 and 25 t-shirts, we have where the demand and the supply curve meet. And that's known as the equilibrium point and the market price at $15. So what about competition? Perfect competition is a situation where there's a lot of sellers in the market and no seller is large enough to dictate the price. Okay? Many people want to sell and nobody is big enough to say this is the way it's going to be. We have monopolistic competition where there are a large number of sellers selling very similar, if not the same thing. But the buyers are perceived as different. And there may be some large sellers in there. We also have an oligopoly, where we have a small number of sellers that dominate the market. In Canada, this might be access to cable TV or internet service. There are not a lot of players in that market. There's Shaw, there's Rogers, there's TELUS, and a few more. There's regional ones as well. So there is competition, but there's just a few large players who dominate the market. And lastly, a monopoly is a market where there is only one provider of the product or service. So, in terms of free market, what are the implications? Well, on one hand, we have perfect competition, many sellers, nobody dominates the market. Monopolistic competition, we have a couple big sellers who potentially are the major players, and we have oligopoly, where we have 1740. Well, no. Okay. Perfect competition is a situation where we have lots of sellers in the market and no seller is big enough to dictate the price or dominate the market. We have monopolistic competition, where we have a lot of sellers, but the products are perceived differently. We have an oligopoly, which is where there's just a few players that dominate the market. In Canada, access to cell phone or access to internet provider would be an oligopoly. There's only a handful of companies that provide internet service in Canada. Shaw, Rogers, TELUS, then there's some regional ones, but there's not a lot of competition. And then we have a monopoly where there is a single provider of a service. So on one hand, we have a monopoly. On the other hand, we have perfect competition where there are many vendors selling. And then oligopoly, just a few vendors who dominate the market, and monopolistic competition where there appears to be product differentiation. So, what do free markets do? Well, it allows competition amongst companies. We can compete. And in a free market, companies must provide quality products at fair prices with decent service. If not, there are lots of other places to go. I look in Kamloops. We have 3 grocery stores within about 200 meters of each other. You could probably stand on a corner and throw a football to each one of them. I might have to throw a pretty far football, but you get the point. Right? In order to maintain your customer base, you need to provide quality, decent prices, and decent service, because people can go elsewhere. Free markets have also allowed poor people to become wealthier. It has allowed people to improve their standard of living and their quality of life. But it's also brought inequality between the rich and poor. You might have heard the expression, the rich get richer. Well, that may be true in some instances. Historically, we've seen some business owners who work their employees hard, don't treat them fair, and they don't have the opportunity to create their own company. So the rich can get richer and the poor stay poor. And it's also led to greed. Greed is a problem in some cases in that it encourages people to think of themselves first. If managers who are running the company think of themselves first, that is not beneficial to the owners of the company or the shareholders. The goal of management is to increase the wealth of the shareholders. But sometimes greed has taken over and the managers make decisions that help themselves before it helps the shareholders. This is actually known as an agency problem. And it has happened in many, many different companies. Another type of system is socialism. Socialism is based on the premise that some, if not most, basic businesses should be owned by the government, so the profits can be evenly distributed amongst the people. So what we have is social equity through economic redistribution. Generally, it's done by taxation through the government. One of the problems with socialism is it may take away that incentive to work and increase our tax rates. Not a lot of people want increased tax rates. And if we remove the incentive to work, then our productivity goes down. I remember years and years ago when I was doing my graduate work in the early 90s, I went to Moscow and we went to a garment factory. And this garment factory had up-to-date machines. They, as a matter of fact, had machines that were essentially the same machines from Germany that anybody could buy. The Americans had them, the Canadians had them, Russians had them. And this was a factory in the midst of being turned over to the employees. It was in the process of going from government run to privately owned. And we went into this one room and they had two machines working. And one of my colleagues had worked in a garment factory and he knew these machines and he knew how they operated. So we walk into this room and there were 12 people working on these two machines. That's 6 people per machine. And he just sat there in awe and amazement. And I pulled him aside and I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, these are the same machines we have in our factories." And I said, "Okay, that's a good thing." He said, "Yes, that is. They have quality machines. The machines are awesome. The product they're producing is great." I said, "What's the problem?" He goes, "They have 12 people running them." And I said, "Why is that a problem?" I know nothing about manufacturing garments. I said, "Why is that a problem?" He goes, "At my factory in the United States, we have one person running both machines." So they were paying 12 times or for 12 people when one person could have done it. And we saw this over and over again as countries privatized, socialized business. And one of the problems is they were turning the businesses over, governments were turning these businesses over to employees. Well, now you've just made every single one of those 12 employees an owner. It becomes awfully difficult to get rid of an owner. If one person could have run those machines, they would have had to get rid of 11. But now you're getting rid of owners. So this was some of the growing pains that we saw in socialist businesses being turned over to employees in a more capitalistic society. Communism is another political system in which the government basically runs everything. Absolutely everything. And some of the difficulties with communism generally come around shortages. Instead of letting the market decide how much is made, the government decides. Well, guess what? They might not decide the right amount. Very often in communist countries, we saw shortages of things. Why? Well, people lose the incentive to work. Why? Because they don't get the benefits of their labor. If you made the same money, and you were one of those 12 people, if you made the same money operating those two machines by yourself, why would you do it? If they're going to hire other people. What is one way around that? Well, we'll pay more for the one person who runs the machine as opposed to the 12 who we needed before. So what we've seen is a shift from communist and socialist economies to being more open, to opening up to more capitalistic tendencies and letting the market decide how much to make and under what conditions, and providing opportunity for people to start and grow their own businesses. So, free market economy. An economy in which the market determines what goods and services are produced, who gets them, and how the economy grows. Basically, the market decides. Money talks, right? A command economy, i.e. communism or socialism, is where the government largely decides what are to be produced, who gets them, and how the economy will grow. Okay? Quite a bit different. Free market economy, things will eventually settle out, the goods will be produced and sold. Command economy, we could have shortages, we could have overproduction. The company that I'm talking about that had 12 people running a single machine, they were making scarves in January to be sold the following year. Okay, they already had their allocation of scarves for this year. They were making scarves for next November, December. So not only would they have made these things, they would have had to store them for that amount of time. And who knows how many they'll need a year from now. Okay. Then we also have mixed economies. Economies where some is controlled by the government and some is controlled by the market. And there are some advantages to this. We saw it in the socialist and communism countries opening up to more capitalistic tendencies, but we also see it in more capitalistic companies employing some of the things from socialism. Canada would be considered a mixed economy. Why? Because we have certain things controlled by the government. Okay. So, what do we have? What are the goals in a capitalistic economy? Private ownership of land and business, freedom, pursuit of happiness, free trade, emphasis on freedom and profit for growth. Communism, Korea, government owns everything. Government run education, government run healthcare. Emphasis on everybody's created equal. Lots of limitations to your freedom, including the right to own a business, change jobs, or buy or sell your house. Okay. On the mixed side, Canada also has a large mixed component. We're basically capitalists, but we do have a large mixed component. We do have private ownership of land and business, but we have government regulation. We have some control of certain institutions, healthcare, education, very highly regulated, controlled, or owned by the government. We also have relatively high tax rates, and that's to provide what's referred to in Canada as our social safety net. And so there's a balance between freedom and equality. That's the goal. Motivation to work. In a capitalist society, there's lots of motivation to work. I get to keep what I work for. Okay. In communism, not much incentive to work or to produce quality. You've got a job, it's equal, can't be fired. Interesting. In socialist societies, there are privatized businesses and there is capitalistic incentives there. But the government has large control over wages, particularly in anything dealing with the public, and it limits their incentives. Okay. So there's a slide you can go through fully. What about choices? This is a good one. Choices in the market. Well, in a capitalistic market, there's lots of choice. You can have lots of options. In a communist society, you have very little choice. This is what we have. Okay, the factory in Russia that I was telling you about, who are making scarves for almost a year from now, they made 2 colors. That's why they had 2 machines. One machine made this color, one machine made that color. That was it. Not a lot of choice. Okay. What about social freedoms? This is a big one. In capitalistic society, we have freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, choice in our jobs. We have the ability to move. We have public elections. In communism, very little freedom. You cannot protest the protest the government. Practice religion. Change your house. Change your job. Assemble. In many cases, there are restrictions on people getting together. And those restrictions exist in many places today. So, Canada does have a mixed economy. The Canadian government wants to grow our economy, but we want social equality. We want that ability to take care of all of our citizens. Things that the government in Canada controls include healthcare, education, telecommunications, and regulations around business. Here's one about education. As high as the cost of post-secondary education in Canada is, your fees do not cover the cost to educate you. Okay, not even for international students. The cost to educate every student on campus is greater than what any individual student pays per student. That's the way it is. Where does the money come from? The money comes from the Canadian government. The US is Canada's largest trading partner, and they have a huge influence on us culturally as well as business-wise. Okay? Very often, Americans misperceive Canadians as identical to them, and Canada and Canadians are not. We have passed a lot of laws in Canada to maintain the integrity of our Canadian culture. One of the aspects of Canadian culture is the right to maintain your own culture. When I was growing up, the United States was often referred to as a melting pot of culture. That is, anybody who comes in from a different country gets assimilated into a melting pot, and they all become Americans, but they're all kind of the same and assimilated. In Canada at the time, Canada was referred to as a cultural mosaic. In the mosaic, each individual piece is different. And through to today, that has been maintained, that Canadians do our best to encourage people who move to Canada to maintain their cultures. And we have laws to help preserve that. One of the things in Canada that we've seen over the years is some deregulation, some easing of the government regulations on certain industries. Why? They did that in order to grow the economy and maintain competitiveness. If we're not competitive, it is difficult for us to compete on the world market if other countries go beyond what we can do. And we're restricted by government regulations. So we've eased our regulations around things like banking, airlines, transportation in general. Okay? Canadian government used to own Air Canada. We used to own some major oil and gas companies, and those were privatized to keep them competitive. And we have also opened up the markets, even in markets that were exclusively government run, like healthcare and education. We now have certain levels of private healthcare in Canada. We now have certain levels of private education in Canada. Again, to increase the economy and maintain competitiveness. So, what are some of the things that we look at in terms of how well a country is doing? What are some of the indicators and metrics that we look at? One is gross domestic product, or GDP. That is the value of goods and services produced by a certain country in a given year. Okay, very often you'll see GDP as a number, and very often you'll see GDP as a number per capita. So you take the entire value of the goods and services, you divide it by the number of people in that country, and you wind up with GDP per capita. Productivity is another way to look at how well we're doing. So if we can produce more goods with the same amount of input, i.e. labor and resource, then we are more productive. If we are more productive, guess what? It decreases our cost per unit and provides lower pricing for the end users. Productivity is an important measure. The unemployment rate is another metric that we will look at to see how well the country's doing. The unemployment rate is the percentage of labor that is actively seeking work but unable to find work at any given point in time. The key part of this definition being actively seeking work. Okay? Some people become unemployed and they're not actively seeking work. So that would not qualify as part of the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is for those people who are actively seeking work. I look back at times when I was unemployed. And sometimes I was unemployed. I would take some time off. Okay? My statistics would not be in the unemployment rate. Once I started to look for work, then I would be part of the unemployment rate statistic. Okay? So, what else? Here is Canada's unemployment rate over time. Okay. From the late 80s through 2014. What we see here in 2007-2008 is something that happened. There was an economic issue that happened there. What happened in 07-08? That was a mortgage crisis. Had an impact on Canada's unemployment rate. Went from 2% to 8%. It quadrupled in a very short period of time. Where was another crisis? There was a crisis in 2000. That was the what? The tech crash. Did that affect Canada's unemployment rate? No. Looked like Canada did just fine through those years. Okay. So generally, Canada's unemployment rate has fluctuated in a fairly narrow band compared to some countries. So, what are some other words we need to know here? Inflation. Inflation is the rise in the prices of goods and services. Disinflation is where the prices are still going up, but not at the same speed. So inflation is slowing. Deflation is where prices are going down. Stagflation is where the economy seems to be slowing down, but prices are still going up. Okay? Inflation, disinflation, deflation, stagflation. CPI is a statistic you will hear frequently, Consumer Price Index. Basically, we measure it on a month-by-month basis, and it tells us the rate of inflation or deflation. Is it going up or down by how much? How fast is it moving? And lastly, we have one that we don't hear terribly often, but is becoming more and more prevalent, and that's the Human Development Index. It's basically a measure of how well the country is doing across a broader scope that includes wealth, health, and education. Okay? So we've got a broader scope that includes things beyond just money or our ability to produce. It deals with people's ability to increase their wealth, the level of health in the population, and the level of education. So, cycles, business cycles. They go up, they go down. What happens? Well, we have certain times when things are going well, when we're creating jobs, where there's economic growth, where there's prosperity. Those are referred to as boom periods. A recession, which is a word we hear fairly often, is 2 or more consecutive quarters with a decline in the GDP. Okay, do you remember GDP, gross domestic product? It is a measure of the value of goods and services that a country produces. So if we go for 2 consecutive quarters, a quarter's 3 months, we go for 6 months, and we see the GDP going down, that is technically a recession. And then if it gets bad enough, it becomes a depression, which is a recession, but bad, Okay? And we have seen depressions throughout the years. Every country has them. Every country's had them in their past. Every country will have them in their future. Okay? So what do governments do? Governments use fiscal and monetary policies to try and keep things stable and growing. Is it always successful? No. But they do their best in order to maintain a stable, solid, and growing economy. So what happens? Boom comes, things go up. Recession comes, things go down. Depression, really bad. Boom, things come back. That's a recovery. Okay? So we see this sine wave of up and down and up and down. And hopefully over time, it is on the upswing. Okay? So, brief introduction to economics. It's the study of how society chooses to employ our resources to produce goods and services and get them out there for people to use. Okay? There's two major branches. Macroeconomics, which looks at a nation as a whole and its economy as a whole. And then microeconomics, which looks at the behavior of people and organizations in a specific market. Okay? Macro, micro. There are courses in both of them. And economics is one of our majors, and you will, if you become an economics major, you'll have to take a lot of courses in macro and micro, or some courses anyway. What else? Capitalism. Okay, capitalism is a system in which all or most of the means of production and distribution are privately owned and operated for profit, and it creates a free market where what to produce and in how much is decided by the market. Remember the supply and demand curves? Not a lot of people want to buy $50 t-shirts, but a lot of people want to buy $5 t-shirts. Not a lot of people want to sell $5 t-shirts, but a lot of people want to sell $50 t-shirts. So where supply and demand meet is the equilibrium point. Socialism is an economic system where it is premised that the government owns a bunch of the businesses in order to maintain consistency and potentially increase the quality of living for all of its citizens. Communism is an economic system where the government essentially owns everything. And they decide what is made and how much is made and what the price is going to be. Canada has a mixed economic system. We are capitalistic, but we also have some socialist tendencies. Government controls things like healthcare, education. Why? In order to maintain stability and get some equality across all Canadians. We also looked at some basic economic indicators. GDP, gross domestic product. How much a country produces. Or GDP per capita, how much a country produces per person. Okay? And those GDP per capita numbers can range dramatically, even in capitalistic countries. There's a difference between Germany, Japan, United States, Canada, Australia. Okay? What else do we look at? Unemployment. Is it going up? Is it going down? Is it stable? What's driving it? Inflation, deflation, stagflation. What's going on with our prices? Is our productivity increasing or decreasing? And what's the impact on all this? What happens in businesses? Well, very often we'll see cycles. Boom, recession, depression, recovery, boom, bust, back and forth. We can see this within larger economies, we can see it within regional economies, and we can see it within individual companies. We can see these cycles. Boom, bust, up, down. Okay? Dealing with a company that's going through that kind of cyclical motion is very difficult at times. Very often we like to see just that nice constant growth. Okay? That's it. Thank you very much.